Hello, my name is Beck and welcome to a spoiler and spoiler-free review for Turncoat by Jim Butcher. This is the 11th book in the Dresden Files. I will be talking about spoiler-free stuff first, so do note the green outline for this video. Later I will jump into red, which means I will be spoiling this book. So if you haven't read the book, don't watch the red part unless you never plan on reading Dresden. So without further ado, let's get into the spoiler-free section. So Turncoat opens and reintroduces a couple of characters that we are already introduced to throughout the rest of the series. One of them is Warden Morgan, who was introduced in the very first Dresden Files book. He shows up at Dresden's door and he is half dead. He is wanted for murder and he's asking Dresden to basically keep him secret and safe at Dresden's apartment while all of this drama blows over, because the White Council want his head. He's wanted for treason, but he's like, I didn't do it. So Dresden has to prove that he didn't do it. And there's a long-standing history between these characters because Dresden has been hunted down by Morgan in the past when Dresden was actually innocent himself. So I like that there was a bit of a gear shift there. So naturally Dresden hides Morgan, and I expected this of Dresden, but I know that it could come as a potential surprise to others because they don't really get along. So the fact that Dresden is helping him might be a bit of a surprise in general, but because Dresden was in that situation and he's got this, I guess, loyalty about him and this justice about him, hence his job and his whole character, I expected him to shelter Morgan and not tell anybody. And that's how the story definitely opens. So in addition to this plotline going on, we also have White Court vampire politics that are taking place on the peripheral and kind of involved. And also there is screen time in here from Thomas, Murphy and Molly as well, which I really enjoyed. Once again, for a Dresden book, the pace was basically never lulling. There was always something happening, but there weren't too many things happening at once. It didn't feel overcrowded. Some book recently has felt quite fast-paced, but that's just because there were 5 or 6 tangents of story going on at the same time, whereas this one felt a little bit more isolated and direct, even though it was still busy from multiple facets of Dresden's life, and I like that about it. It kept things interesting and it kept the pace moving as well. And as always, as I've said across the rest of my reviews, at least especially in the spoiler-free section, that the characterization has always been absolutely on point and it only continues to grow in breadth and scope, and that's what I love about this series. At times in this one it was heartbreaking as well as humorous, and I like that balance too. So characterization and pace were definite strengths of this one, and I also want to talk about the plot as well. It was the same as the pace for me. There was always something happening and I was always interested and intrigued. I always wanted to know what was happening next, and I also kind of had an inkling about something that was going on. I didn't have the entire scope of this particular plot point pinned, but I had a little bit of an inkling towards a particular character, and that helped me figure out something about them. I'm being obviously vague in the spoiler-free section. I will mention it specifically in the spoiler section, so stick around if you're interested in what thing I'm being particularly vague about. But I saw something brewing, but when it came to the ending, I didn't actually see that come to fruition in a way that I expected. So even though there were seeds planted to make me suspicious about a certain thing, Jim Butcher still surprised me in the way that he conveyed the plot outcome of this particular seed planting, if that makes sense. And I like that Jim Butcher keeps stringing me along like this. He keeps putting things into his plot and then surprising me later, and that is one of the main reasons that I come back to this series, because I love a book that I can't predict, as everybody would be able to relate to. We don't want to be able to predict what's going on, so I like that Jim Butcher can kind of string me along, make me think a particular way, and then pull out the rug from under me in a way that is informed and spectacular and very characterized and believable at the same time. In addition to all of that, I really enjoyed the themes in this one, especially the theme of not giving up despite loss. It was something that felt quite solemn going through this book, but I think it's important to assess where Dresden is now and where all the people he cares about are at in their lives now. They're not in their early 20s anymore, they're not young anymore, and they're starting to feel the weathering of all of these dire situations they've had to experience together. And so when they experience loss and when they experience dark things, or they go through a darker situation with a lot of trauma, there's obviously going to be some sort of outcome that is not always a positive one that you can laugh away. And I like that it had a serious and solemn tone in this one, as well as also the obvious humor that we come to expect with each Dresden installment. Initially, I thought I'd give this one a 4.5 stars, just because some parts of the solemn narrative clearly didn't hit me initially with the same impact as something that might be high stakes climactic action. But after I finished reading this, I sat back on it and I just reflected a little bit, and I came to the conclusion that I just discussed about Dresden and trauma and his friends and loss, and I ended up moving that rating up to a 5 instead, because this had such brilliant characters in it that have all grown significantly. They're not just cardboard cutouts of these particular archetypes at all anymore, and I really enjoyed the way they all interacted, and I like again how I was so surprised. So naturally this had to come as a 5 for me, because it had all of the old hat things that I love about this series, like obviously the characterization and the humor and the different plot juggling, but it also had something that felt deeper and more entrenched, and I'm very excited to continue on knowing that it is starting to go a little bit deeper and darker, especially with more solemnity about the characters and the outcome of different things. Okay, so now we are going into the spoiler section. So if you haven't read this book, or if you plan on reading this book, don't watch this section because I'm going to spoil everything. Every time Thomas comes into a book, I am always excited. I really enjoy his character and how he bounces off Dresden. I like the rapport they have together, and it became particularly heartbreaking in this one to me because I feel like Thomas and his character development, especially with his vampire nature, like his demon side of him, he has kind of overcome that, but not in a way that he is satisfied with. And it's very on the peripherals of the stories so far. It's like Thomas refuses to address that with Dresden, and so we as the reader don't get to experience that depth because Thomas is holding it back. And so I'm hoping that in the future there can kind of be that here's my cards on the table situation, so Dresden has more of a scope about it and Thomas can actually have help that he needs, because this book, and especially with the way that it ended, had that heartbreaking scene after Thomas had been tortured by the shapeshifter, and that just really broke me down, and he just needs somebody to help him. And it gave me a little bit of hope when he was leaving after interacting with Dresden and Dresden zapped the security guard's radio and made Thomas smile. I feel like he's still in there, but he's not fighting anymore. He's just given up. And I know that Justina and Dresden will fight him on that decision. So he has people in his court, he has people in his side, and he will be able to get back out of the rut that he's fallen into. But because of all the trauma that he has endured, especially by the shapeshifter and all of the mental manipulation that comes with being in the White Court, and especially from Lara as well, I'll get into her in a second, I feel like because of all of that building on top of him, he's starting to get flattened by all of it, and so Dresden just has to pull him out from under that pile and brush him off and re-establish him, or help to re-establish him, because he can't do that on his own. Thomas has to do it first, and Dresden has to help him. I hope that with Thomas's character development, it's very interesting to me, but I'm going to be sad if he retracts and becomes very cold, because from the moment that he was introduced, I think in like book 3 or something, I was like, this guy's interesting, I like his charm, I like his charisma, and he seemed very humorous and a very, very neat balance for Dresden. So I'm happy that he's stuck around this long. I love the action scenes when he turns up because he just automatically has Dresden's back, and I love that. So hopefully that doesn't disappear. I doubt it will disappear, but Thomas is either going to get a redemption arc or he's going to be killed, and I'm really ignoring the killed part, so I hope that he gets a redemption arc. And now Lara. After considering this for a while, I've actually realized that I like Lara, but I like her the way that she's written rather than liking her as a character. So I can appreciate her. I think that's the right way to put it. Not like or dislike, I appreciate her. She's humorous and clever and conniving. She keeps Dresden on his toes. Whenever there's an alliance with her, I expect the plot to just amp up significantly with little twists and turns in it that I'm going to be surprised and shocked by. And I'm always going to wonder how Dresden is going to pull himself out after he has had an interaction with Lara, because she tends to just pile things on top of him to her benefit and not really consider him unless they've made a deal. And even then she wiggles out of it backwards as well. So I appreciate the way that she brings a uniqueness to the story. I like the different facet that she brings as well with the relationship with Thomas, because obviously they're siblings, but I like that it adds some kind of complexity and a little bit of a wild card, especially at the end of this with all of them on the island. The White Court vampires had a bit of a standing against the enemies as well. So they can cooperate with the White Council, they just choose not to because they're a very separate and different entity. And that brings me to the fact that I like Lara, but sometimes she has this power about her and then she seems awesome and she seems intelligent, and then you realize, oh wait, she's a vampire. She literally murdered Madeline in cold blood and it was very gruesome and dark. So she's definitely got that evilness that she's not afraid to tap into, whereas Thomas is more removed from that, and I like him more as a character, but I appreciate Lara, if that makes sense. And also now the fact that she has Thomas in the mansion and he's effectively under her thumb, that makes me very nervous. I was going to discuss Molly specifically and then Morgan next, but in looking back at these characters and writing all my notes, I've realized that there is a kind of common thread in the way that Butcher has put his characters together, specifically in this book, and it's that they all have this darkness to them and they're not entirely good and entirely bad. And I love that about characters. It gives them more versatility to me. So Dresden, obviously, he's got his dark spots as well. He tries to always do the right thing, but people still go to war for him, people still die for him, and he doesn't always win. And so he does have this darkness about him too, and it manifests definitely in this morose feeling about him and this aggression and this impulsivity. And so Dresden has that darkness about him too. And I also want to mention that I feel like the headaches that he got at the start of the book that weren't really mentioned further in, that is going to link to something darker later, maybe with his subconscious, maybe somebody is trying to break into his head, but I digress. I'm talking about the darkness about these characters, and I loved that Molly and Morgan had those things about them as well. And I love how that linked into the doing good things for the sake of good. It's only good from your perspective. How do you know it's good from everybody else's? Because Molly decided to break into Lucio's head, and she did it because she thought it was the right thing to do, not because Lucio could consent to her doing that. And similarly, Morgan, he has had this rapport with Dresden in a negative sense this entire time, but because he thought that it was the right thing to do and he thought he was the just one in this situation, he disregarded Dresden completely, even though Dresden was innocent. So he's had that track record this entire time as well. And so I love how all of these things were so balanced about all of these characters, and that they were so fleshed out, given that these are definite side characters. Like, we haven't seen Morgan for a couple of books, and if we do, we see him very peripherally. We don't see him as in depth as we did in here. In addition to that, we've also got Thomas, and he also wants to do the good thing, but he has this demon, this literal demon inside of him that is pushing him always to do the bad thing and the immoral thing. And I love that he had to push through that, and he has so far, but this book is very much a several steps back for him in that regard. So hopefully he can be pulled back, like I said before. We will see. And that is the attitude that I'm ultimately taking away from Turncoat. It is the discussion that people, or characters rather, despite the darkness in them, can do the good thing anyway and can make that choice to not give up, which is very much cemented in the ending, where Dresden goes to the young werewolves who lost one of their kin, and he brings around a game board and butters with him so that they can kind of rekindle that memory about the people they've lost, and they can carry forward the enjoyment, which is what these characters would want ultimately after they passed away. So I love that it had that solemn quality to it, but it also pushed through with humor and consideration, and it made a space afterwards, and it let you grieve this loss, but it also pushed forward towards something like light at the end of the tunnel, I guess. It gave you some sort of positivity without putting a band-aid over it and going, well, everything's fixed now because the story's ending. It's not a happy ending scenario, but it's the best they could do. And I think that is really the ultimate story here. It's the best they could do. They are trying to look on the brightest side. Now, I don't know if I mentioned it before because I can't remember, but I did tear up in this book more than once. The first time was when Morgan shot Mouse. I was like, you touch that dog, you're dead. And so when Mouse was injured, obviously he's a very intelligent dog and he was faking it the entire time, but I didn't know that because obviously he's been in battles and sustained a lot worse and brushed it off and been fine. And he definitely emphasized that to Dresden at the end after Molly had patched him up, but he was kind of teaching her a lesson. So the fact that not only the verbal side characters Thomas can be built up, but Mouse can be built up as well. It's just stunning to me. Mouse is probably one of my favourite side characters, but at the beginning, he was so easy to dismiss. The same about Morgan, actually. Not that he's my favourite character, just that he was really easy to dismiss at the beginning. Kind of like they're both character archetypes. Like Mouse is that animal sidekick character, and Morgan is that archetypal rival or villain against Dresden, but now they've both had significant airtime and they've been built up in their own individual ways. And so in here, we get to see Mouse's intelligence grow, and we get to see him interacting at the end in the court case with the other White Council members and how they acknowledge him as a temple dog, I think he's called. And so you get to see from when he was a puppy and very insignificant to all the way through up until this point, and he's actually built ground for himself. And then similarly with Morgan, I actually got a little bit emotional when Morgan passed away at the end of this book. I expected him to suffer. I didn't expect him to pass away. So that was quite dark of an ending, but I love that he had that sense about him to, I guess, retract his views about Dresden. I really like the send-off that he did. I didn't expect to care about Morgan, who we vehemently hated at the beginning of this series. And I think Butcher does that brilliant job of weaving characters so beautifully that all of what happened in here, it was basically a 180, but it was done on such a slow burn that it was 100% believable. I also want to note that the connection that Dresden made to the island, apart from it being really bloody cool, is also really scary, because I think in the past Lucio said that he's connected, or he will be connected to the island in like a prophecy or something, and he might die there. So we're just starting this ball rolling, and I'm not liking the way that that seems to be ending. So hopefully that's fine, probably not, but let's move past it. We got a Murphy moment in this book. I love the Murphy moment. They both said I love you to each other, and I was like, you guys are killing me. That is the cutest thing ever. However, when Dresden went to the island to fight against the Black Council, and he encountered Madeline of the White Court, and she kissed him on the head, and it had an effect on him. And so the fact that it had an effect on him made me think, wait, he said that he loved Murphy, and that was used as a plot device to make him realize that Lucio and him never loved each other. Otherwise it would have burned Madeline and it wouldn't have worked. However, because the kiss from Madeline worked, I was also like, does that mean that the love between Murphy and Dresden isn't a thing? Or do they have to actually be in a romantic relationship for that to actually apply? So I don't know if they have to be in a romantic relationship. I believe they do, but I hope they do, given that there is time for them to develop further, and they've got such a tenderness about them that they seem to brush aside because they respect each other's boundaries and they don't want to get too emotional with each other. At the same time, they're very vulnerable with each other. So I feel like we know and they seem to know unconsciously, but it's just them actually making the next step into actually acknowledging it. And it doesn't feel like very long since they had that conversation in the hotel about where they stand with each other and their relationship, but they've actually grown years since, because Molly has now been Dresden's apprentice for almost 4 years, so that has really grown the time that they've had that discussion from. So potentially there is going to be more development in that section, because as soon as it was introduced as a love triangle with Lucio, I was like, I don't think that's going to happen. So I knew that something was going to unravel there, and I like the way that Lucio had that mind control magic on her, and I appreciate that it made her into somebody that she kind of wasn't, like it pushed her towards Dresden, because that earlier was the vague thing that I was talking about. It seemed like Lucio was just getting close to Dresden, and I think I might have said this before. I thought she was just initiating that relationship so that she could push closer to him and then manipulate him from being inside his circle, and technically that kind of was going on, except it wasn't Lucio's modus operandi. It wasn't her doing it necessarily, it was just her being the pawn that was being made to do it by somebody else, an external. And so I kind of clocked it, but I kind of didn't. And I like that Lucio is still kind of in the game, but it also makes me nervous that she knows now that Thomas is Dresden's brother, because she has that ace up her sleeve if she decides to use it, and now she's got no deep loyalty to Dresden anymore. I feel like they have a mutual respect now, but nothing too deep. And so the fact that she knows about Thomas also makes me nervous, and I feel like that is going to get touched on later, probably at a very integral moment that Dresden doesn't need it to come out in front of everybody, but it probably will, because that's just how Dresden works. And I know I just mentioned that I thought Lucio was being manipulated. I wanted to mention something something else, and that was I thought she was actually a Black Council, and that's why she was getting close to Dresden. I'm kind of glad she isn't. I know that it would have been maybe a bit obvious if she was, but I kind of wanted it to happen just to be more interesting. Anyway, I'm assuming that somebody Dresden knows is Black Council, apart from Peabody, who is revealed and then killed in this book. And I'm thinking, or I thought initially that it might be Ebenezer, but then when Ebenezer proposed that they're going to start the Grey Council together, I was like, he's cool, he's fine. He was just going to propose this different idea that was against the White Council, and that's why he was a bit seedy or shady about it. And so I was a bit suspicious about him, but it turns out he's just going against the White Council rather than against Dresden and the greater good. He's not Black Council, he's just Grey Council. And I like that Dresden has already started to build up his effective Grey Council with the Para Network, I think it's called. I've forgotten the name. I listened to it, but I didn't write it down. I like how he's built up his own network, which is pretty cool, and how that is starting to formulate people being safer in the supernatural community. And I think that's what his mother, Dresden's mother, was trying to do, but she was going about it not in quite the right way. And we got a little bit more about Dresden's mother in this book from Lucio, which was pretty cool to see too. Another thing that I wanted to mention is, I know I definitely breathed a sigh of relief when Toot Toot was revealed that he did not die after being slapped by the monster and his armor protected him. I was so upset when that happened. I had to pause the audiobook and kind of just sigh and hope for the best, and sure enough, it was fine. Toot Toot is still alive, I'm assuming, unless he's been injured and he's just off the page for a while, but he did get mentioned at the end, and so I'm holding out hope that he's okay. And so basically, in conclusion, I am so amped up about the inclusion of the Grey Council with Ebenezer. I'm really excited to see how that gets expanded on, and I'm excited to get into the next book, Changes, because that has been hyped up to me for a very long time, pretty much since I started the series, and so I have massive expectations for it. I'm going to start it really soon, and I love how this world has just even grown more than I even expected it to, and I'm really excited to read more of it. I also can't believe that I'm almost up to date with the series, which is very sad. I'll just have to go back and reread it all from the beginning, I guess. But that is it for this review. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars if that wasn't already clear. Thank you so much for watching. Come chat with me down below about your favorite moments of this book or your favorite characters so far. I would love to know, but thank you again. I will chat to you down in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.